Thank you for your patience, everybody. Anyways, like Glenn said, I'm doing this presentation with Mark and Leighton.
Julie, you're showing, I think, presentation mode is, viewer presenter mode as opposed to.
Oh, yep.
Let me swap them.
Yeah.
Okay, how's that?
Hey.
Perfect.
Okay, yeah, so I'm presenting this with Mark and Leighton. And so what we thought we would do is do sort of chronologically, like the progression of like the oldest sort of process to the newest process, as well as a national perspective going down to a more localized perspective. So anyways, I'm Julie McGrew. I'm a program and management analyst with the Division of Planning and NEPA with BLM headquarters. And I am actually a landscape architect by training, but I have been doing multiple jobs, including oil and gas permitting, lands and realty, actions and authorizations on the ground. And I've been very involved with the VRM program since I started with BLM about 11 years ago. So I'm going to cover the BLM, and then Mark will cover the Park Service, and we may open it up to a few questions before the break, and then Lynn will do her presentation. So with the BLM, we are mandated by federal law to manage visual resources. And we're also mandated by the National Environmental Policy Act to disclose any impacts to the human environment, as well as give like a baseline of the affected environment. And within BLM, we also have internal policy on how to manage visual resources. And these are the examples of, FLIPMA, which is it mandates our multiple use, and also NEPA for the National Environmental Policy Act. And so all these documents basically say we have to manage scenery as a resource. And then for us in the BLM, most of our lands are out west, and they provide a lot of scenic escapes, the backyard to many Western communities. We're kind of in that urban interface between like the higher elevation forest lands and the urban landscapes. And it's also, BLM has a lot of cultural and historic context and provides health and well-being benefits as well. And any decisions we make on the ground have impacts to scenic quality and visual quality. So, any of these actions that we do on the ground, like recreation planners, lands and realty, they all come into play, and they all have a piece or a dog in the fight for protecting and managing visual resources. And then, of course, I think you guys will hear more about some of the new challenges that we have that are affecting us on the ground, but we're not going to go into that here. We're just going to talk specifically about the inventory process, a high level view. And so with the BLM, it's kind of a cyclic pattern. The big piece of it is the inventory. The inventory is the baseline that informs our land use planning efforts. And then those land use planning efforts inform how we implement activities on the ground. And then how we implement activities on the ground, we have to monitor those projects to make sure that they're in conformance with our land use plans. And then we also have to maintain our inventories, and then those feed back into like land use plan revisions, and potentially they could feed back into amendments to those land use plans. And so with the BLM visual resource inventory, there's three components that feed into the final visual resource inventory. There's scenic quality, there's sensitivity, and distance zones. And this is a systematic process. It's quantitative, meaning there's numbers tied to it. So it's objective, it's repeatable. So you could have different groups of people doing this that may have the same end result, but may have subtle differences in how they got there. And so this provides a snapshot of our existing condition on the ground for land use planning and also for NEPA analysis. And we do have a handbook for this too, on how we do visual resource inventories, and that's on the left there. And so the first thing with our inventory is scenic quality evaluation. It's basically we're asking, like, what does it look like on the ground? And one way to do this is to use descriptions like Mark just discussed, talking about the features and characteristics and how one area is defined as different as another area. And for our inventories, our unit of measure is a polygon. So it's very GIS based. We do field components, like this piece is in the field, but we all bring it back in from the field and it's digitized into GIS. So we're looking at similar physiographic characteristics, similar patterns, textures, colors, varieties, man-made modifications. And this is kind of an example showing you a landscape. So like in this landscape, this would be like a scenic quality rating unit because it has similar patterns, textures, vegetation, topography, and the same with this. So this could be another scenic quality unit along those same principles. And then this would show like what would it be like if it was mapped. So you have one big polygon, but then you might delineate it smaller. And then there's always people that are lumpers or splitters. It just depends once you get out on the ground to ground truth these things, if you want to make them the units smaller or if you think they might be bigger. And so when we do the scenic quality evaluation, we're basing it on 7 key factors. And each of these factors will feed into a final scenic quality evaluation rating. So we have A, B, and C. And the areas that have the most visual variety have the greatest scenic value, like the example in A, and then less scenic variety, example C. And these evaluations are done by an interdisciplinary team. And you look at these polygons from several different locations. And where you look at these polygons are called inventory observation points. And then we keep a photographic record. And then the score based on these 7 factors is based on the overall impression. So it's not just from one point. You may do several points and it's your overall impression from all those points on how this will be rated. And this kind of gives you an idea. This breaks it down into more detail, probably more than you want right now, but I'll just give you an idea for like landform. So you'll look at the landform and you'll rate it on a score. And this is what I was talking about, how it's systematic and it's, you know, it's repeatable. So because there's numbers tied to it. So something that's very dramatic and is memorable might be a score of 5. Something that's just kind of not a lot of topography, you know, not a lot of original features might be a 1. So you do that for each one of these factors. And then you come up with a total, like I kind of just gave a hypothetical one on the right there. And you take those numbers and you add them up and that gives you a total score. And then we have it broken down, you know, class A's 19 or more, a class B's 12 to 18, a class C is 11 or less. So that gives you the scenic quality classification. The next one is sensitivity. Again, the question we're asking here is the importance to the public. Like, what is the willingness of the public to accept visual change by location? And our unit of measure, again, is the polygon. And then we assign one of 3 possible ratings. So high sensitivity, the public would be the least willing to see changes on the landscape. Medium, they're kind of like in, you know, on the fence maybe. And low sensitivity, they'd probably be the most willing to see changes on the landscape. And so we also want to factor in these, well, we have factors to consider. So type of users, like who's out there on the landscape? Is it people recreating? Is it people commuting? Is it people working on the landscape? We need to think about that. We also want to think about amount of use. Is it just 1 or 2 people? Is it like big groups? Is it like one time a year? Is it every weekend? Also public interest. Is it like a local interest, regional interest, a national or international interest? Is it published like in books or guides or national newspapers or magazines? So those things all elevate the sensitivity. Also adjacent land uses, like if you have, you know, if this, say that top one is the backdrop of a, you know, one of those urban interface communities, you know, they would probably be pretty sensitive about any changes on the landscape because they probably moved there because they like that landscape and they want to be close to it. And then you also want to think about special areas. So anywhere like, you know, wilderness areas, you know, wild and scenic rivers, things like that, as well as other factors. If there's like significant or interesting research occurring in a landscape that's tied to scenic quality. And then our last one is distance zones. And I think Mark covered that in the previous session. It's kind of the same Same idea, it's like where and how people are viewing the landscape. And again, it's a polygon, and it's divided into 3 distance zones. So we have the foreground, middle ground, 0 to 5 miles, background 5 to 10, and then seldom seen is greater than 15 miles. And we also use viewshed analysis as a way to kind of delineate some of these seldom seen areas. And I won't go into detail here, but that's another methodology that can be used. And when we select these platforms to determine the distance zones, we use like frequently visited areas by the public, like travel routes, observation points, basically wherever the public most typically convenes to see these, to visit these landscapes or to view these landscapes. So then we take the scenic quality, the sensitivity, and distance zone, and that will give us our final VRI, or visual resource inventory class. So for example, we have a scenic quality B, high sensitivity, and say distance zone background. And then you just follow the matrix, and that gives you a visual resource inventory class 3. And this again will get mapped out in GIS to give you something along these lines that will show you each visual resource inventory class for your planning area. And that's the BLM's visual resource inventory process. I think we can probably wait for questions until after Mark's presentation, if that works.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So now I'll give you a little quick overview of the NPS inventory. And like I kind of mentioned before, there's a lot of foundational elements to kind of hang our program on. When we started doing this a number of years ago, BLM, Forest Service, FHWA, they're all out there with programs in place to, evaluate the landscape and start to understand, how, changes might affect that. And so, and as Julie mentioned, it all starts with the inventory and stuff. And so that this is going to give you a real quick overview of our process into that. And you'll note some similarities and a few differences. Next slide. Okay, so we've been trying to, in the Park Service, get to this same place where John mentioned before, scenery as a resource. It's not been something that the Park Service, had any kind of a mindset about. And honestly still is a challenge, working with parks. There is not a federal mandate for the Park Service to manage scenery directly, nor is there a mandate or a requirement, a policy to have inventory classes on park lands and stuff. So it is directly in the Organic Act. It's the first thing that's mentioned that the Park Service will protect and stuff. So there is, some law behind that says you're going to do it. But there's never been any, consistent effort, any concentrated effort on the Park Service to do it in a kind of a methodological way. So next slide. So as the inventory, as I mentioned, it's part of a program. And we have components much like the other agencies where we want to get, the inventory information into, planning documents so that it can live long-term and be understood kind of how it interacts with other resources, from a management perspective, and so that it is considered in the management of the park along with the other resources. And the other thing that we do is then provide support in helping parks understand how impacts might happen, how they might affect, the visitor experience, and trying to lend some, consistency to that, how it's addressed, in the Park Service on a service-wide basis. Okay, next slide. So when we set out to do this, the purpose, much like I think any program, is to get that baseline information. You've got to understand what you've got before you can understand why it's important, what's valuable about it, and how you protect it. And certainly being able to map that information along with the other resources is part of that key as well. Next slide. So as we set out to do this, design the program, design the process, we have a little bit different perspective in that the Park Service is a very visitor-driven kind of agency. We are, we know where the visitors are going. We have viewpoints, that are specifically designed for people to go there and look at the, particular view. And so what we do is we capture that perspective instead of going out in the landscape, which, might actually be on another agencies or a private land. If it is looking beyond a boundary, our visitors don't necessarily see that. So we're going to capture that perspective, and we need to have a process then that works in all kinds of landscapes, because we have park units that range from Alaska to Florida and everywhere in between, deserts and forests. So something that works in those landscapes, and then also equally values that historical and cultural context, because we have a lot of historical parks, a lot of battlefields that have scenic values. As John mentioned before, every landscape has those scenic values, and ours are really, really variable as far as the historic and cultural context as well. Next. So kind of alluded to this, that people don't see boundaries. They see a landscape, they see a composition. And so that's where we look at it from that visitor perspective, and we might be looking out over, other agency land, other private land. But again, to our visitor, it's a composition, it's a full scene. And in our process, we decided, because of the historic and the kind of the cultural context of many landscapes, that the scenic quality and what we describe as view importance or importance values, they're equally weighted. So we're not valuing the scenic quality above, the other aspects that are important to the process. And at the end of the day, we go out and we do some training in the parks. We never complete an inventory at a park just because there's usually so many viewpoints to look at, and we need to leave the tools behind and stuff. So this process is designed so that you do not have to have, landscape architecture background. You get the training and follow the method, and you can do this and stuff. And that was going to be an important part of being able to carry this over the long term. Okay, next slide. So what actually happens? How does this work? So again, I mentioned, we look at it from the visitor perspective. So our inventory unit is a view rather than a polygon with kind of those light physiographical, consistencies on the landscape. We're looking at it, our polygon, we quite literally go out and we put a left boundary on a view and a right boundary on a view, and that's what our visitor sees. And so we've divided that up into the three components: is kind of where you're standing, what you're looking at, and then the viewers themselves and stuff. Because in many cases, the viewpoint can be just as valuable as what you're looking at, especially when you're looking at battlefields or historical parks where, somebody may have stood at a specific point and stuff to take in, a specific scene. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, we have the scenic quality and the view importance. They're both equally weighted. Well, that's really probably about it for this. Just go ahead and go to the next one. Sorry to say, we do not do the distance zones as part of this analysis. It occurs later in our process. So the first part of our process in the scenic quality component is a view description. This is where we use a lot of that language of landscapes that we just talked about. It's very structured. We've got a really comprehensive form that you fill out for this. It's very intimidating when you first look at it, but it's pretty simple once you start to get into it, and it kind of guides you through the process. So it's consistent the way that every park does it. This is not rated. There's no opinion in it. It's just a description of what's out in the landscape. And so it's really based on kind of just all those things that you actually can see in the landscape. Next. Then you moved on to assessing the scenic quality. We have three kind of main factors that we have that there's ratings within. So landscape character, integrity, vividness, and visual harmony. Inside of each of these main factors, there are three elements that actually get the ratings and stuff. And there's a little too much detail to go in at this high level, but each of those 9 factors for scenic quality, they're all equally weighted. They're all scored 1 through 5 according to very specific guidance and stuff. And so you end up with a score at the end. Next slide. And much like the BLM system, it comes out to the highest and lowest. We've got 5 different categories of scenic quality just because, we divided it up into the extra categories turned out to be beneficial, especially in the different types of landscapes that we have. But it's a simple sum system, and you just score each factor, and it results in the level of scenic quality. Then you move on to the view importance. Next slide. And we do that the same way. There's a descriptive aspect to it. That's, again, there's forms for everything. It's very structured. Everybody does it the same, whether you're a natural resource park at the Grand Canyon or Monocacy National Battlefield. Everybody's doing it the same. And again, this is not rated. It's just simply information about the viewpoints and what you're seeing in the landscape. The key difference here is this is where knowledge of the park staff is really critical, because features in the landscape that matter, cultural features that might be out there, then that that's an important feature. Okay, somebody can see it, but it may have certain scenic qualities, but it has other values, for its cultural or historical context, or the viewpoint. Again, if a general stood right here to direct a Civil War battle, that's where kind of that viewpoint takes on heightened importance. Next slide. And then you do the rating process, and just like the scenic quality process, there's 3 main factors that we assess information about, and that's the viewpoint, again, the viewed landscape, and the viewers themselves. Inside of each of these, much the exact parallel process to scenic quality, there are 3 factors within each of these that actually get the rating. Those 9 factors are rated 1 through 5 according to very specific guidance, and you end up with a score much like the scenic quality. Next slide. And you go highest to lowest, and you have a view importance rating that just sums up all of those, just the same way that you do for scenic quality. And last slide, or next to last slide. Oh, one in between. So what happens when you have both of those? Okay, now we've got the 2 pieces, and we combine them into what we call a scenic inventory value. Okay, we don't have a mandate to put those classes on the ground. And so what we do is this value, all the Park Service can really do is, especially expressing to other agencies or private property owners, these are how the park values these landscapes. This is not suggesting any kind of management. This is what it means to us. So next slide. And of course, then we have to have a matrix, and stuff. Ours is just a little 2-sided matrix, and you combine the scenic quality and the view importance. We've summarized these down into these kind of 5 colored categories that you see here, from very high to very low, for a communication and kind of a mapping simplicity. When you do a viewshed analysis or any kind of analysis, all of the scenic quality ratings and the view importance ratings are maintained, in the GIS data. So from a mapping standpoint, you might have, some landscapes that are very high, very low, but you know what they are. And so, sorry about that. You by looking at the data, you know that this landscape that's high happens to be very high scenic quality, but not terribly important, or it could be equally have the same level of importance, have a really high level of view importance, but be kind of marginal scenic quality, but it still is, very high on the scale as far as value to the park. Next slide. And again, geospatial, much like BLM is going to do, at the end when they've got their data, we want to be able to map it. And so the map you see on the top kind of shows, okay, this is how we put a polygon around it, because we put some boundaries on it, left and right, when we're out in the field and we do the scenic quality rating. And then the distance, to bound the polygon so that you can actually map it, then that can be set in the office, based on a view shed analysis or other factors, and you can set that boundary on it to be able to map it. And then on the lower one, example of, what a view shed analysis might look like. And again, that area might be visible from a particular location. And if you look at the data there, you know that it has this level of scenic quality and this level of view importance behind it, and it falls into a certain category that way. But this way we can map it, analyze it, overlay it with other resource management kinds of things, as looking to make decisions, in managing the park. And so that, we want that mapping so that we are a resource that's in the mix for park management, basically. And I think that's the end. So, yep. That's the end. So I think with that, if there's time for a couple of quick questions, maybe we're going to switch over to Leighton, the couple of federal level kinds of things, and we'll switch gears and get into kind of a real locally driven, community driven kind of a process. But if we had any questions or something at the moment, we could pause very quickly and take a couple questions. Otherwise, we'll I move and have Leighton proceed.
So, Mark, I don't have any questions in the chat box.
Okay.
But I do think what you guys put together in terms of the comparisons between the two federal programs and paying attention to the idea of scales and the inventory piece is really informative and good. And I think the language is good. The language that you used was also good. So there is one question here. How are the scores of multiple viewers managed?
Great question, because that is something that is actually, a specific part of the NPS process, is that it is a team exercise. Okay, this is not one or two people going out in the landscape and doing the inventory. Our suggested team is 4 or 5 up to about 8 is tops. Get too big and it gets a little unwieldy, and you get 1 or 2 people, and that's not the way the system was designed. We don't average scores. It's just simply everybody has their own rating form. They have their own guidance, and you sit and you kind of do it on your own at every viewpoint. And then there's a discussion. Everybody sees the landscape a little bit differently as far as features out in the landscape, or things that attract their eye, or things that that they don't necessarily like. So it's very much a team discussion kind of thing to reach a consensus. It's not an average or anything like that. But that's a great question, because ours is it's very much a team exercise as far as the scenic quality aspect in the field.
All right, well, we have a break right now. So all of the sessions across each of our tracks are going to be doing 15 minutes.
Oh,
so
okay.
If you all would take a 15-minute break and come back at 3:45, we'll start with Leighton and then finish up with you and Julie.
All right.
Yeah, we'll just have Leighton and then the conversation about how we go forward.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Take a break, go see the lobby, enjoy.